my sister Wendy, Cynthia, my niece, and Lisa, my sister-in-law, went missing. I just didn't know what to do except pray.
Nobody wants to see a child go missing, and Wendy suffers from MS. So it was critical that we find them immediately.
I desperately wanted to get them back. A feverish, almost obsessive hope.
But Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa vanished out of thin air, and they could not find them.
It consumes you. You lie awake at night thinking about it.
We need to get this case broke open and solved.
But what we found was very disturbing.
It made me sick to my stomach.
Now, you know who did it, but it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
I still wanted to find out what happened to them, and I never gave up trying. It's me and my sister every day.
The world looks a little brighter for 23-year-old Wendy Camp, since she's getting to see her 4-year-old son for the first time in months. She's been locked in a custody battle with her ex-husband, Chad No.
Chad made arrangements for Beverly No, Chad's mother, to drive to Oklahoma City, pick Wendy up, and bring her to Shamrock, Oklahoma, where Chad was living at the time, to visit with Jonathan, their 4-year-old son.
Beverly had called and said, "We're going to come and pick you up to have a visit with Jonathan." My daughter was ecstatic.
Wendy was super excited to go, and her daughter, she's 6 years old, asked to go, and she was permitted to go. Wendy's current husband did not feel comfortable with Wendy going alone, so he had asked his sister, Lisa, to go with them. Wendy reluctantly agreed. You know, she really wanted to just go by herself with Cynthia, her daughter.
He asked Lisa to tag along because he was concerned about Wendy's safety because she suffers from MS.
They got to Shamrock at about 1:40 p.m. on that day. The first thing they did was stop at a convenience store there so that Wendy could call her husband, Leon, let him know that they'd made it there. From there, Beverly took them to Chad's house. By all accounts, the visitation went well. Beverly showed back up at the house at around 4:30 to pick Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa up to take them home. Convenience store, and again, Wendy called Leon to say, "We're headed back home." And that call was about 4:45 p.m.
Shamrock, Oklahoma is about 80 miles from Oklahoma City. It should have taken an hour and a half to 2 hours to get home.
But Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa did not make it home.
Wendy was the class clown. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She was amazingly smart, straight-A student. Everything that she did, you know, she picked up the flute, picked up the clarinet, played the piano, and with zero effort. She really was my role model.
Cynthia was a live wire. I wish I could bottle that energy. I'd be a millionaire. Very, very inquisitive on anything and everything. Very, very intelligent, just like her mom.
My niece's favorite thing when my sister would get home from work was bubble bath time. I remember once Wendy even called and said, "Did you get the bubble bath ready? I'm almost home."
Lisa, my daughter's sister-in-law, was a young mother with 2 small children herself.
My sister-in-law, Lisa, was a very, very docile, sweet girl.
Lisa Kreger was Leon Kemp's sister. She was also 23 years old in the spring of 1992.
So we had a huge loving family.
Leon was very, very concerned when they had not made it home by 8 o'clock.
Wendy had multiple sclerosis, and she needed her medications daily. If she did not take the medications, it would immediately throw her into an attack from the multiple sclerosis and could lead even to immediate death.
Leon fears something is wrong. And when he talks to Beverly, Wendy's former mother-in-law, that fear deepens. Beverly, who'd driven them to the visit, dropped them off at a shopping mall 45 minutes outside Oklahoma City, instead of driving them back home.
According to Beverly, Wendy was complaining the whole time, so she'd finally had enough, so she stopped at the Walmart parking lot in Chandler, dropped the girls off there, and said she figured they could get a ride from there.
Beverly felt that leaving them in Chandler would be okay because they would be capable of getting a hold of Leon to come and pick them up.
You would expect that the first thing Wendy would have done was call Leon, but that did not occur.
Leon called me and said, "Mom, they're not home. What do I do?" I said, "Call the police and have them come out and take a report on missing persons."
The Oklahoma City Police Department responded around midnight that day.
It was excruciating happened. I had the feeling deep down in my heart that it was not going to be all right. No.
The family waits by the phone, fearing the worst, as the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the OSBI, starts searching for Wendy, little Cynthia, and Lisa.
All of the people who had been working at the store on that date were interviewed. People in businesses in the area, everybody was talked to, and nobody reported seeing anybody like that. They could have taken off walking down the highway. They could have tried to reach out to people in the parking lot. You would expect somebody would have had some contact with them.
Maybe somebody offered to give them a ride and then something untoward happened. Did they decide to strike out on their own and maybe a car hit them? Where did they go?
It was imperative to find these 3 women as quickly as medical condition, and the fact that Cynthia is only 6 years old.
Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa had disappeared. My parents were just beside themselves, frantic. Where are you? My sister and niece, Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa, my sister-in-law, went missing at a parking lot.
The longer you go without finding them, the chances of finding them alive dwindle pretty quickly.
With her MS, if Wendy is not found immediately and start taking this medication within 3 days, she will start going back into a coma.
There were searches of the whole surrounding area. There were deputies on horseback looking through the rural areas.
Law enforcement even did aerial searches to make sure that the girls weren't in a ditch somewhere.
But nobody could find them.
Special agents talked to Beverly No, Wendy's former mother-in-law, about the ride back.
Beverly was the last person to see Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia. It is important to establish what could have happened.
Beverly said that when she picked the girls up, her mother, Ida Pruitt, was also with her. They hadn't got a block, and Wendy was just complaining about everything. So Ida told Beverly, "Why don't you just take me home?" Beverly dropped Ida off and then continued on to Chandler, Oklahoma.
When she reaches the Walmart in Chandler, she said she had become very tired of listening to them. So she just stopped and dropped them off. Beverly was very cooperative with us, answering all the questions, everything she...
The family wants to believe that Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa are still alive.
There's still hope that maybe they were somewhere being held hostage or something.
I just didn't know what to do except pray. I literally turned to God and said, "God, please help us. Please bring them back safely."
Agents interview Wendy's husband, Leon, and clear him. That's not the case with Chad No, Wendy's ex. Red flags pop up right away. And they're connected to Wendy's illness.
When Jonathan, my grandson, was 3 weeks old, that's when she developed the multiple sclerosis. Wendy could not walk or anything.
She fell into a coma. This vibrant, bigger-than-life personality now just lying there day. When Wendy was in the coma, we found out that Chad had filed for a divorce and for custody of Jonathan. That was just one shockwave on top of another shockwave.
But Wendy's family is grateful when Chad's mother, Beverly, steps in to help him care for the new baby.
We did reach out to Beverly and ask if she would take care of Jonathan. Beverly loved Wendy. It was a big relief. Beverly was awesome. Everything is going to be great.
When Wendy was recovering, she reached out to Chad to get visitation with Jonathan. At first, the visitation went fine, but then ultimately ended up in the courts.
Chad wanted custody of Jonathan, and Wendy had wanted custody, and so they were fighting over him.
Because of the custody battle, him being angry over it, and then he sets up the meeting, which leads to their disappearance.
Chad No was interviewed numerous times. Chad's story matches up with Leon's story and with a lot of what Beverly said.
We did a search of Chad's house looking for evidence. However, we did not find anything.
Chad was never ruled completely out, but Chad No did not become the focus of this investigation.
All the interviews and searches lead nowhere.
It was good investigative work. There just wasn't a lot to go on.
It was very frustrating because we could not develop any evidence that could tell us what had happened.
When you get to the point where you have no more leads, it consumes you. You lie awake at night thinking about it. What else can I do?
I decided that I'm not going to give up hope, but I'll never forget what my mom said to me. She said, I'm telling you right now that they're dead.
Personally, it bothered me that we could not find Lisa and Wendy because of her medical condition, and especially because of Cynthia. Nobody wants to see a child go missing.
I didn't know if somebody had gotten them from the parking lot. Unfortunately, the parking lot didn't have cameras.
I think the investigators did look into the possibility they were abducted from the mall or on the way to a phone. Tragically, I've covered cases where that has happened.
Then a possible lead comes in from neighboring Missouri, an apparent abduction.
There had been some women go missing in Missouri under similar circumstances.
3 hours away in Springfield, Missouri, there was a mother and daughter that went missing along with the daughter's 18-year-old friend and disappear in Oklahoma. And then the next month, 3 other women disappear in Missouri. Their stuff was still in their house, their cars were in their driveway, and they vanished out of thin air too, just like our mother and daughter and Lisa did. They weren't living a high-risk lifestyle. There really was no reason that they should have gone missing whatsoever.
I contacted the investigator, and we compared the specifics of his case, and we just could not make a connection.
They could not find any evidence linking these women. Just all 6 women disappeared under suspicious circumstances.
Random abductions do happen. This is before cell phones, and it was a big mystery. It was a terrible tragedy.
The family's fear and pain grow with each passing day.
We prayed that as an innocent you survived. Please, Lord, please, at least let my little granddaughter be alive. I'm sorry.
My mother literally could not function, was sitting on the floor in a pool of tears, unable to move, just screaming, "Where's my daughter?" I can't imagine the despair and hopelessness that she felt at that moment. I tried every day to reach out to news medias. I started reaching out on the anniversaries. Can you do an update on Wendy or Cynthia's birthday? But there was just no movement.
A year and a half after the disappearance, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries features the case. Oddly enough, it is one of Wendy's favorite programs.
Back, Wendy was an avid buff. How excited we would get watching Unsolved Mysteries back in the early 90s.
the OSBI decided to reach out to Unsolved Mysteries because maybe somebody would see the show, recognize them, and we could find them that way.
They came out and did the interview, and we felt that that could help solve the case.
Something about the program stands out to Wendy's sister. In an interview, Ida Pruitt, Beverly Noe's mother, strongly denies she or Chad Noe had anything to do with the disappearance.
Why would Ida get so upset and claim on the Unsolved Mysteries segment that my sister was griping and a bitching about the past? Her remarks do not make sense because my sister was struggling with memory. I knew right then and there when I heard that statement on the Unsolved Mysteries episode that it was false. I knew that the family was involved. When the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired, that's when the OSBI were saying that the facts didn't line up. Now Beverly came out as the strong suspect, the last person seen with them. But I thought so highly of her. Did Beverly really do this?
At first, they did have to take Beverly's statement at face value, but at the same time, things didn't really add up.
Beverly said she dropped the women and child off. We checked. We could not find any witnesses. And if Wendy had a problem, she was going to call Leon.
I guarantee you in 1992, she would have been able to find a payphone outside that parking lot.
And then I learned that Beverly was very angry due to the custody battle.
But by all accounts, it went beyond that. She basically wanted Jonathan for herself.
But there was never any information developed to implicate.
And they weren't really anywhere close to that.
At the time I retired in 2000, I was disappointed that we had not located Cynthia and Lisa and Wendy.
I can't imagine what it would be like to know that one of my family was missing and we could never find them.
Suspicions remain, but leads dry up. And the case of Cynthia, Wendy, and Lisa goes colder than a winter freeze in Oklahoma.
The pain and anguish of not knowing, it dominates their thoughts and their dreams.
Maybe Cynthia, my granddaughter, has survived. That was a desperate, feverish, almost obsessive hope for me.
Cynthia's family never gives up. They connect with groups dedicated to finding missing children.
There were several organizations that deal with human trafficking and that type of thing that worked with us.
The Missing and Exploited Children wanted to do an age progression photo of Cynthia.
Somebody might recognize Cynthia if she was still alive.
Maybe Cynthia would look like this. And it just gave me more hope.
I just saw how beautiful she would have been. It rips your heart out, knowing that this is just images that aren't real, that it could have been.
The case languishes for years, but a suspicious fire might revive it. Police charge Beverly Noe and Ida Pruitt with arson.
Beverly and her mom, Ida, are in jail. And I was like, what?
Beverly and Ida set Beverly's house on fire, and they were arrested.
They did it for insurance money. It just shows the corruption in their soul.
I was ecstatic. Maybe they can offer Ida a free card out of jail, get her to turn against Beverly. And I got told by law enforcement in general that that's not possible.
Ida and Beverly spent some jail time for that case.
Beverly and Ida do 6 months and are released. Then, 4 years later, Ida Pruitt dies, giving the police a possible opening in their case.
In 2011, Ida Pruitt passed away. She was the one that held the family together.
Now, maybe people are going to start talking and giving information up about the case.
It takes 2 years, but the hunch proves right when an unnamed relative calls in with a lead.
A tip had come in to investigators telling them that they needed to look at this case.
This person's story was that the bodies were buried under a cement slab at a home where Grover Pruitt used to live. Grover Pruitt is Ida Pruitt's son and Beverly Noe's brother. So, is Grover Pruitt involved in these murders?
A tip had come in that we needed to go talk to Grover Pruitt, Beverly's brother, about Wendy and Lisa and Cynthia. We were actually excited about it.
The story was that the bodies were buried under a cement slab at the house where Grover Pruitt used to live. You've got to check that out because the case had definitely gone cold. You're looking for anything to kind of get it going again. The tip was vetted out, but no bodies were found. Still, this did jumpstart the investigation again on Grover Pruitt.
We interviewed Grover at his house. The strategy was just to see if any of the other family members had to Grover. Did he know where their remains were?
Grover started telling him about this other property he owned back then. He kept saying, I don't know anything about this, but if I was going to look anywhere, it would be out on that property.
Grover had sold 5 of those acres to his mother, Ida. She had asked him to dig her a hole. Shortly after that, Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia went missing. And Ida told him to cover that hole up. Grover said that maybe the girls could have been buried there.
And Grover pointed out a depression in the ground where the hole for the septic tank had been. That got us really excited.
If Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia were in there, we didn't want to disturb any of the evidence when we started digging. Also, if we found them, we wanted to preserve their remains.
Excavation on the hole begins, and it's a slow and careful process.
Even though we had a piece of heavy equipment out there, a backhoe, we had to have a special bucket on it. You basically want to scrape away a little bit at a time.
It was not a quick process. Got anything but dirt.
And since it was dug for a septic tank, this hole was 8 feet deep.
Police ask Wendy's family to stay away until the work is done.
They just told us that they would let us know the results.
And I said, I want to be present if they do find the bodies.
They said, all right, well, you can come to this little town, but you got to wait at the police station.
As we got further down, we began to find layers of trash.
After the trash, there was another layer of dirt where we didn't see anything, but we were still digging and very hopeful. And then we saw a little sneaker.
When the bucket of the backhoe scraped across the dirt, we could see something that looked different. The first thing that appeared were the soles of Cynthia's tennis shoes. And it was very somber.
In the hole, there were what appeared to be 2 adult skeleton remains and then a smaller child's skeleton remains. We may actually have found them.
The clothing was exactly the same as what Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa were wearing on the last day they were seen alive.
There was a Ruger 357, 2 kitchen knives in the hole. There was a backpack with Cynthia's name inside, and there was a purse with Wendy's medical card.
When they came in and told us that they had found them, all we could do was just cry and pray and walk. We couldn't even sit down.
When the news reaches Leon Kemp, Wendy's husband, it makes a real impact.
Just imagine your wife and your sister who had been part of your family and they never come home. Last time I talked to Leon, he was working at a hospital and he had found some peace in knowing that they were at rest and not a mystery.
Investigators have finally found the bodies of Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa. Now they have to solve a second mystery that has eluded them for 21 years.
We're still going to have to go out and find the evidence of murder. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
You can't just go on hunches. You have to have evidence to file charges.
You know who did it. The hard part is being able to make somebody pay for what they did.
We had found Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia's remains, but what happened to them after they left Chad's house? We needed to tie Beverly to the homicides.
Picture of them in the grave. The first thought that came to my mind was, this will be the last photograph I ever see of them. They are gone.
As agents slowly remove Cynthia, Wendy, and Lisa's remains, they make a gruesome discovery.
It was readily apparent that Cynthia had duct tape covering her face, including her nose and mouth. That was very disturbing to me. You're talking about a 6-year-old girl here.
Looking at the duct tape on Cynthia, it's a sickening feeling.
Cynthia had duct tape wrapped around her head, and I think that she was left to suffocate.
An autopsy was performed. Wendy Camp had sustained gunshot wounds. Lisa Kreger had multiple gunshot wounds to the torso. And Cynthia by homicide by undetermined means. But who pulled the trigger, who held the knife, those kind of things, we're still going to have to prove that Beverly Noe did it.
The OSBI special agents turn to the person who helped them find the bodies, Beverly Noe's brother, Grover Pruitt.
We asked him if he would wear a wire and go talk to his sister about Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia, and Grover agreed reluctantly.
We attached a recording device to him and told him to specifically mention something about guns.
Grover told Beverly that OSBI wanted his .357, and Beverly said, "I don't know why they do that. We threw all the guns in the hole." And he shut her down. Grover definitely was sabotaging the efforts.
Grover's attempts to protect his sister don't stop the authorities.
With the discovery of the bodies and everything that we learned with Beverly's statement on the recording about guns, we decided it was time to arrest Beverly. Beverly was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but she never admitted to any of this.
The evidence against Beverly Noe is shaky. Prosecutors aren't sure they can convict her of first-degree murder.
Who actually killed these 3 girls? It could have been Beverly or Ida, either one, but Ida had died. So Beverly ultimately pled guilty to 3 counts of accessory to murder because she claimed that Ida had done it. We don't have enough evidence to say exactly where any of them next to the hole or in the hole or whether they were killed before they got there. So ultimately, it would be nice to know that. Beverly Noe was given 15 years in prison for this because of Beverly's age.
Then, less than 5 years later, the family faces one final injustice.
Beverly's back out in society. It's crazy.
I can't say for certain why she got out early, but I think it had to do with some health problems she was having. Does it anger me? Yes, it angers me.
I feel that my family members got no justice whatsoever simply because of the fact Beverly is out of jail after 4.5 years. What's the justice? Where was the justice? And to this day, 30 years later, Jonathan is still living with Beverly.
Every single day, I miss them. I miss my daughter. The intimate memories and the closeness and being able to hug her or kiss her or call her on the phone. I miss family. Family.
If I had a chance to just spend some time with Wendy and Cynthia, I would just say, I love you. And you really impacted my entire life. I'm grateful, and I never quit loving you.
The road looked the same as it always had. A flat ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark, heat still rising from it long after the sun had disappeared. Texas nights have a way of holding on, refusing to cool, refusing to let go of the day. In the summer of 1984, the air felt heavy enough to breathe in handfuls. Crickets screamed from the ditches. Distant radios crackled in patrol cars drifting through empty stretches of highway. Nothing about that night suggested it would become a headline decades later. Nothing warned that it would one day be called a cold case. Nothing hinted that a routine traffic stop would quietly mark the beginning of a story that refused to die. First, it didn't even feel like a crime. Not officially. A call came in just after dawn. A vehicle found off County Road 17. Engine cold. Driver nowhere in sight. The report was calm, procedural, the kind that happens more often than people realize. Cars get left behind for all kinds of reasons. Breakdowns, drunken decisions, sudden arguments. People storm off and cool down. Most of the time, the driver turns up embarrassed but alive. That was the assumption, at least in the early hours, when deputies stood beside the car with their hands on their hips, scanning the empty fields and tree lines. The vehicle itself told a confusing story. No sign of a crash. No shattered glass. No blood. The door was open just enough to suggest haste, not violence. Inside, personal items remained. A jacket folded on the passenger seat. A cassette tape stuck halfway through a song. The kind of small, ordinary details that make investigators pause, because ordinary details don't belong in extraordinary moments. It looked like someone had stepped out intending to come right back. By midday, the word missing had begun to circulate. Family members retraced the victim's last known hours, replaying conversations in their minds with painful clarity. Did they sound tired? Distracted? Worried? Nothing stood out. That was the worst part. There was no warning. No argument. No plan to disappear. Just a normal day that ended in silence. Search teams fanned out across nearby land, moving slowly, methodically. Boots pressed into dirt baked hard by the sun. Voices called out names that echoed back unanswered. Helicopters passed overhead, their blades chopping the air into anxious pieces. The town watched from porches and gas stations, from behind newspaper racks and steering wheels, pretending not to stare but staring anyway. In small places, mystery spreads faster than facts. When the body was found, the tone changed instantly. There is a moment in every investigation when hope collapses into something heavier. When the possibility of a simple explanation vanishes, replaced by the certainty of violence. The discovery site was close enough to hurt. Close enough to make people wonder how they had driven past it without seeing anything. The ground bore quiet witness to what had happened, offering no clear answers, only proof that something terrible had unfolded unseen. Photographs were taken. Evidence markers placed. Notes scribbled in tight handwriting. The victim's identity was confirmed, and with it came the full weight of finality. This was no longer about finding someone. It was about understanding why they would never come home. The local department worked the case hard and fast. Detectives canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors under a sun that punished patience. They asked the same questions again and again, listening not just to words but to hesitations, glances, changes in tone. They traced movements, mapped routes, calculated timelines. Every minute of the victim's last day was stretched thin, examined for meaning. And yet, clarity refused to appear. No había suspects emerged. No witnesses stepped forward with a story that held together. Tips flooded in at first, fueled by fear and imagination, but most dissolved under scrutiny. Theories rose and fell. A stranger passing through. A personal conflict kept secret. A crime of opportunity that left no signature. Each idea promised resolution, then delivered nothing. Evidence was collected with the tools of the era. Fibers, hair, smudges. Samples sealed carefully, stored with the confidence that science someday would know what to do with them. In 1984, DNA was a whisper on the horizon, not yet the thunder it would become. Investigators did what they could with what they had, building a case out of fragments and instinct. Meanwhile, life in the town adjusted around the absence. People locked doors that had never needed locks before. Parents warned children with a seriousness that lingered long after the words were spoken. Conversations dropped into hushed tones whenever the case came up, as if speaking too loudly might invite the same fate. The murder became a reference point, a dividing line between the way things were and the way they would never be again. And somewhere, buried in paperwork and routine, was the traffic stop. It happened late. Another stretch of road. Another patrol car rolling slowly through darkness. A vehicle caught the officer's attention for a minor violation. The stop was clean, uneventful. License checked. A few questions asked. The driver's answers were short but acceptable. Nothing triggered alarm. Nothing justified escalation. The encounter ended as thousands of others had ended before it, logged, dated, filed away. At the time it meant nothing. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The case remained open, active, consuming hours and energy. Detectives argued over priorities, chased leads that led nowhere, stared at evidence boards searching for patterns that refused to form. The pressure was constant. Solve it. Bring answers. Restore a sense of safety. But pressure does not create truth. Sometimes it only magnifies uncertainty. As time passed, the investigation slowed. Not because anyone stopped caring, but because resources are finite and new crises demand attention. Another robbery. Another assault. Another family waiting for answers of their own. The unsolved murder slipped gradually into a quieter category. One where files are revisited instead of lived with. Where progress is measured in inches rather than leaps. For the family, the waiting never eased. Grief hardened into something permanent. A background noise that never faded. Birthdays passed. Holidays arrived and left. Each year without answers felt like a second loss. They learned the rhythm of disappointment. The careful balance between hope and self-protection. Inside the department, the case became a shadow. New officers learned its outline during briefings, absorbing it as part of the institutional memory. Veterans remembered working it in the heat, remembered faces, remembered moments that still didn't make sense. Every so often, someone would pull the file, convinced fresh eyes might catch what others had missed. They would read, they would think, and then they would put it back. Evidence slept on shelves, boxed and labeled, waiting without knowing what it waited for. Technology advanced quietly, steadily, while the case remained frozen in its original form. The world moved on. The murder did not. Years later, the phrase cold case would be used to describe it, but that term never quite fit. Cold suggests absence of feeling, lack of interest. This case had never lost its heat. It had simply been buried beneath time, beneath the limits of what was possible when it began. The road where the car was found still exists. The place where the body lay looks ordinary now, indistinguishable from countless others. That is how these stories survive. Not as monuments but as invisible layers beneath the present. People pass through without knowing. Without imagining that one small decision, one brief interaction, one routine stop, is already written into the future. In 1984, no one knew that the truth was closer than it appeared. Hiding in plain sight. Recorded in ink and forgotten in a file. No one knew that decades later, a simple review would shake the foundation of what was believed to be unsolvable. For now, there was only the weight of an unanswered question, hanging over a town that had learned how to live with uncertainty. The night swallowed the road again. The case stayed open. And time, indifferent and relentless, began its long march forward. The weeks after the funeral blurred into a dull procession of questions that never landed anywhere solid. Detectives kept returning to the same timeline, the same narrow window where everything had gone wrong, convinced that if they stared long enough it would finally crack. The victim's last confirmed sighting became a fixed point in space and time, pinned like an insect to a board. A cashier remembered a brief exchange. A neighbor recalled headlights passing later than usual. Each memory felt important, yet none of them connected cleanly to the next. Texas in the mid-1980s was a place of motion. Long highways, trucks rolling through the night, people coming and going without leaving much of a trace. That mobility complicated everything. Anyone could have passed through. Anyone could have vanished just as easily. The idea that the killer might already be gone, miles away, settling into another life, gnawed at the investigators. They scrutinized the vehicle again, hands gloved, eyes tired. Every inch was searched a second time, then a third. Seats removed. Carpet lifted. Trunk emptied and examined under harsh light. What they found was frustrating in its normalcy. No weapon. No clear struggle. No foreign object screaming this matters. Just traces that could belong to anyone who had ever ridden in that car. The autopsy offered grim certainty but little guidance. Cause of death confirmed what everyone feared, but motive remained a blank page. There was no obvious robbery. No sign of prolonged torture. Nothing ritualistic. It didn't fit neatly into the categories detectives relied on to narrow their search. Crimes like this are the hardest. They don't announce themselves. They whisper. Rumors filled the gaps left by facts. In diners and church halls, theories took on lives of their own. Someone swore they had seen a suspicious truck near the road that night. Another insisted the victim had been arguing with someone weeks earlier. Names were passed around carefully, then with growing confidence, then with reckless certainty. None of it held up. Every rumor dissolved under scrutiny, leaving behind only resentment and unease. Investigators interviewed coworkers, friends, distant acquaintances. They looked for secrets, debts, grudges. They found nothing substantial. The victim's life, by all accounts, was ordinary, predictable. That ordinariness made the violence feel even more obscene. If this could happen without warning to someone without enemies, then no one was truly safe. The file grew thicker. Photographs yellowed slightly at the edges. Notes became harder to read as ink faded. Still, the detectives refused to let go. They cross-checked similar crimes across counties, across state lines, chasing patterns that never quite aligned. A killing here. A disappearance there. Close enough to raise hope. Different enough to kill it. The traffic stop remained buried. It sat in a logbook, one entry among thousands. Time. Location. License plate. Officer's initials. At the time, it was just another moment in a long shift, another reminder that most police work is repetition, not revelation. No flags were raised. No follow-up requested. The driver was polite enough. Nervous, maybe, but nervousness on a dark Texas road meant nothing. Everyone is nervous when blue lights flash behind them. As months turned into years, the department changed. Detectives retired. New ones arrived. The case was handed over like an heirloom no one wanted but everyone respected. Each new lead was met with cautious optimism, followed by the familiar disappointment. The term unsolved began to appear more often in internal discussions, spoken quietly like a diagnosis. For the family, anniversaries became markers of endurance. 1 year. 5. 10. Each one reopened wounds that had never fully closed. They learned how to answer questions from strangers who had just discovered the story, how to nod politely at sympathy that came too late to change anything. They clung to the hope that someone, somewhere, knew something and would eventually speak. Law enforcement technology advanced in small incremental ways. Databases improved. Communication between agencies became easier. Old evidence was cataloged more carefully. Yet the core problem remained. Without a suspect, without a confession, without a clear trail, the case stayed suspended. Then came the slow awakening of forensic science. First, it was barely noticed. A seminar here. A memo there. DNA was discussed in abstract terms, a promising tool still finding its footing. Older cases were mentioned as possibilities, but resources were limited, priorities elsewhere. Still, the idea planted itself quietly in the minds of those who remembered the unsolved murder from 1984. What if the answers had been sitting on a shelf all along? Years passed before that question was acted upon. When the case file was reopened for review, it wasn't driven by a dramatic tip or a sudden confession. It was routine, part of an effort to reassess old cases with modern eyes. Evidence boxes were pulled from storage, their seals intact, their contents unchanged. Items that once seemed insignificant were now treated with renewed respect. Technicians handled samples with a precision that would have seemed like science fiction in the 1980s. Gloves changed constantly, tools sterilized, every movement documented. The process was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. This was history being asked to speak again. Still, progress was uncertain. Many old samples degrade. Time is not kind to biological evidence. Investigators prepared themselves for disappointment, for the possibility that decades of waiting would end with another dead end. Hope by then had learned to stay quiet. As the lab work continued, detectives revisited old interviews, listening to recordings with a different ear. Pauses that once seemed meaningless now felt heavier. Statements once dismissed as irrelevant were re-examined. They weren't looking for something new anymore. They were looking for something overlooked. The town had changed in the meantime. New buildings stood where old ones had fallen. People moved in who had never heard of the case, who drove those same roads without any sense of what had happened there. Yet among those who remembered, the story never truly faded. It lived on in warnings, in half-finished sentences, in the way people glanced at strangers a little too long. The investigators knew that if there was an answer, it would not announce itself dramatically. It would emerge quietly from data and probability, from a match that did not care about emotion or time. Science does not feel satisfaction. It only reports. And then one afternoon the phone rang. The call was brief, controlled, professional. A lab technician explaining results in careful language. A sample that had yielded enough material. A profile that had been generated. A comparison that had been run against databases far larger than anything imaginable in 1984. There was a potential match. The name meant nothing at first. Just letters on a page. A date of birth. A record that extended far beyond the borders of the small Texas town where the murder had occurred. The detectives sat with the information, letting its weight settle. This was the moment they had rehearsed for years, the moment when possibility shifts into direction. As they began to trace the name backward through time, through addresses and records and forgotten stops, one detail rose quietly to the surface. A minor traffic violation, logged late one night, not far from the original crime scene, logged in the same year, logged by an officer who had never imagined it would matter. The routine stop, once meaningless, now glowed with new significance. The case was no longer just unsolved, it was awake. The name sat at the center of the table like a live wire. Not dramatic, not infamous, just a name that had survived quietly through the decades, drifting from address to address, job to job, never once colliding with the unsolved murder that haunted the department. Until now, detectives stared at it, not with triumph but with caution. Cold cases don't explode open. They whisper and sometimes they lie. They began where procedure demanded. Verification. Chain of custody. Confirmation that the sample had not been contaminated, mislabeled, misunderstood. The lab reran the comparison. Same result. Statistically overwhelming. The kind of number that leaves no room for coincidence. The DNA did not just resemble the suspect's profile. It matched. Still, DNA alone does not tell a story. It answers who, but never why, and rarely how. To build a case that could withstand scrutiny, investigators had to reconstruct a life, thread by thread, back to the night everything ended. The suspect had been in Texas in 1984. That much was now undeniable. Employment records placed him within driving distance of the crime scene. Old utility bills confirmed addresses that had long since been demolished or repurposed. He was not a drifter passing through for a night. He had been rooted there, briefly but firmly, during the exact window investigators cared about most. The traffic stop emerged from the archives like a ghost. A carbon copy citation, edges brittle, ink fading. Time. Location. Reason. A broken taillight. The officer's notes were sparse, professional, Unremarkable. No mention of suspicious behavior. No follow-up requested. At the time it was nothing. Now it was a pin marking the suspect's presence in the same dark geography as the murder, within hours of the estimated time of death. Detectives retraced that stretch of road. The asphalt had been repaved multiple times. Businesses had come and gone. Yet the bones of the place remained. Long sightlines. Sparse lighting. A road designed for passing through, not stopping. It was easy to imagine how a brief encounter could turn fatal, how violence could erupt and disappear without witnesses. They studied the suspect's history next. Not looking for monsters, those are rare, but for patterns. Prior arrests surfaced. Nothing violent enough to stand out. A bar fight here. A disorderly conduct charge there. The kind of record that blends into the background of police databases. The kind of record that never triggers alarms. Friends and former co-workers were contacted, cautiously at first. Many were surprised to hear the name again. Some struggled to remember him at all. Those who did described a man who kept to himself, who could be charming in short bursts, unsettling if crossed. Temper, they said. Controlled mostly. Until it wasn't. As detectives listened, they felt the familiar chill of recognition. Not certainty. Not proof. But alignment. The pieces were beginning to face the same direction. The victim's last known movements were reconstructed once more, this time with the suspect in mind. Timelines tightened. Gaps shrank. What once seemed random now felt conditional, as if the night had been waiting for a particular set of circumstances to collide. A chance meeting. A shared stretch of road. Two lives intersecting briefly, violently, irreversibly. Still questions remained. How did they meet? Was it planned or impulsive? Did the suspect know the victim beforehand? Or was this truly random? Without a confession, those answers might never fully surface. But the law does not require omniscience. It requires coherence. The family was notified before any public announcement. The call was made by a detective who had never spoken to them before, someone who carried the weight of history carefully in his voice. He explained the development slowly, choosing words that balanced hope with restraint. After decades of silence, the idea that the case might finally move forward felt unreal, almost cruel in its timing. They listened. They asked questions. They cried. And then they waited once more, for the process to unfold. Meanwhile, the suspect lived his life unaware that the past had found him. He had aged, softened at the edges. Gray threaded through his hair. Lines carved themselves around his eyes. He had a routine. A neighborhood. People who nodded when he passed. To them he was ordinary. To investigators, he was becoming unavoidable. Surveillance began quietly. No sirens. No confrontations. Just observation. His habits were documented. His movements tracked. Nothing about his present life hinted at the violence investigators were uncovering in his past. That contrast was unsettling. It always is. The decision to arrest was not rushed. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence meticulously. Defense strategies were anticipated and countered. Every document was checked, every procedure scrutinized. Cold cases are fragile. One misstep can shatter decades of work. When the warrant was finally signed, it felt less like victory and more like responsibility. This was not an ending. It was an obligation to act. The arrest came at night. There is something deliberate about nighttime arrests in cold cases. Darkness mirrors memory. It feels appropriate, almost symbolic, that accountability arrives the same way the crime did, quietly, without spectacle. Officers approached the suspect's home with practiced calm. Lights off. Radios low. The door was answered by a man who seemed confused, not yet afraid. They told him why they were there. For a moment, his face revealed nothing. Then something shifted. Not shock. Not anger. Recognition. As if a long-held breath had finally been released. He did not resist. He did not ask questions. He simply nodded, as though confirming something he had always known would come. At the station, the interview room was sterile and bright. The suspect sat alone for several minutes before detectives entered. He looked smaller under the fluorescent lights, less certain. Age has a way of stripping away illusions. They began gently. Basic questions. Biographical details. He answered easily, confidently. Then the conversation turned. Dates. Locations. Texas. 1984. The traffic stop. The broken taillight. His body reacted before his words did. A tightening of the jaw. A pause that stretched just a second too long. Detectives watched closely. Silence in those moments speaks loudly. They placed the evidence in front of him piece by piece. Not accusing. Just presenting. The DNA result was last. It always is. There is no arguing with numbers that large, probabilities that absolute. When he saw it, the room changed. He did not confess. Not fully. He deflected. Minimized. Claimed memory loss. Suggested contamination. Suggested coincidence. But the confidence he had entered with was gone. In its place was fatigue. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. Outside the interrogation room, the case took on a life of its own. News outlets caught wind of the arrest. Headlines formed quickly, compressing decades of pain into a few charged words. Cold case cracked. DNA breakthrough. Suspect in custody. The town reacted in waves. Older residents felt vindicated, unsettled, relieved. Younger ones were shocked to learn that such a story lived beneath their streets. Conversations reignited. Old suspicions were revisited, then abandoned. The truth, it turned out, had been quieter than anyone expected. As preparations for trial began, detectives returned once more to the evidence, not to find new answers, but to understand the weight of what had been achieved. This was not just a case closed. It was time reclaimed, a voice restored, question finally given shape. And yet, even now, not everything was resolved. Motive remained elusive. The exact sequence of events would likely never be known in full. Cold cases rarely surrender every secret. They give just enough to remind us that justice, like memory, is imperfect. But the silence was broken. And for the first time since 1984, the night no longer owned the story alone. The name on the report does not scream danger. It does not echo through history or trigger instant recognition. It sits there, plain and unremarkable, typed in black ink like thousands of others that have passed through police databases over the years. Yet inside the task force room, that name carries weight. It bends the air. Detectives look at it knowing something fundamental has shifted. A cold case does not announce itself when it begins to thaw. It tightens quietly, almost politely around the truth. The DNA match is confirmed again. And again. Independent analysts. Separate machines. Separate days. The conclusion does not change. The biological material preserved for decades, scraped from beneath a victim's fingernails and sealed away in evidence packaging that smells faintly of dust and time, aligns perfectly with the suspect's profile. Not similar. Not probable. Exact. The kind of match that erases coincidence. Still, the room does not erupt in celebration. Experience has taught them restraint. DNA can place a person in proximity, but proximity alone does not tell a jury what happened in the dark. To make this case stand, they must build backward through time, reconstructing a life that has tried very hard to leave no sharp edges behind. They begin with geography. Texas in 1984 was vast, hotter, less forgiving. Records from that era are incomplete, scattered across filing cabinets and microfilm reels. But persistence is a language detectives speak fluently. Employment logs surface first. The suspect worked construction, temporary contracts, short stints. Enough to move, enough to blend in. One job site places him less than 20 miles from where the victim was last seen alive. Then addresses. Rental agreements that barely survive photocopying. Utility bills stamped with dates and handwritten account numbers. Each document is a breadcrumb and slowly a path forms. He lived there. Not long, but long enough. Long enough to be part of the landscape. The traffic stop emerges like a quiet confession from the past. A routine encounter between a patrol officer and a man driving late at night. The reason is mundane. A broken taillight. The officer noted compliance. Calm demeanor. No search conducted. No reason for alarm. At the time it was forgettable. Now it becomes a timestamp, a physical confirmation that the suspect occupied the same stretch of asphalt, the same dark corridor of Texas roadway, within hours of the murder. Detectives study that road as if it were a witness. They walk it during the day, then again at night. The lighting is sparse. Long shadows stretch across the pavement. In 1984, there were fewer businesses, fewer houses, fewer reasons for anyone to be watching. A car could pull over without drawing attention. Voices could rise and fall without consequence. Violence could happen quickly, then vanish. They return to the victim's timeline, overlaying it with the suspect's movements. What once looked like random gaps now feel deliberate. The victim was last seen heading in a direction that intersects with the suspect's known route. A convenience store receipt places the victim on the road. A witness remembers headlights slowing near the shoulder. At the time, no one connected the dots. Now the dots begin to pull toward each other. Background checks reveal little at first glance. No murder charges. No convictions that would make headlines. Just a life lived slightly out of alignment. Fights. Arguments. Jobs left abruptly. Relationships that ended badly. People who describe him as intense, unpredictable, capable of warmth and sudden cruelty. Not a monster. Something more dangerous. Someone ordinary enough to be overlooked. Detectives interview former co-workers. Many struggle to place him at first. Decades erase faces. But when memories come, they arrive with qualifiers. He had a temper. He didn't like being challenged. He could flip. These statements do not prove murder, but they color the edges of the picture. One former acquaintance remembers a story he told years later about a woman who pushed him too far on the road one night in Texas. At the time it sounded like bravado. Now it lands differently. Detectives write it down carefully. Anecdotes are fragile things, but sometimes they echo louder than facts. The family of the victim is contacted next. This call is never easy. You cannot package decades of grief into a careful sentence. The detective explains that new evidence has emerged, that a suspect has been identified, that the case, long labeled a cold case, is moving again. Silence fills the line, heavy and trembling. Then questions. Then tears. Hope and pain colliding all over again. They ask if this means answers. The detective chooses his words with care. It means progress. It means accountability is possible. It does not mean everything will make sense. Cold cases rarely offer clean endings. While paperwork moves forward, the suspect remains unaware that the walls of his present life are closing inward. Surveillance begins quietly. Officers observe him grocery shopping, fueling his car, talking with neighbors. He looks like a man who has learned how to exist without drawing attention. He laughs. He complains about the weather. He waves to people who know him only as a familiar face. The contrast is unsettling. The idea that someone can commit an act of extreme violence and then continue forward, carrying it silently, aging into normalcy. This is the part of cold cases that never feels resolved. The years that were stolen cannot be returned. Prosecutors review the evidence with surgical precision. They anticipate defense arguments before they are made. Contamination, degradation, chain of custody. Every envelope, every signature, every storage log is examined. The evidence holds. The timeline holds. The DNA holds. When the arrest warrant is signed, there is no celebration. Only resolve. The arrest takes place at night, when the world is quieter, when neighbors are less likely to notice. Officers knock. The suspect answers, confused, blinking under the porch light. He listens as his name is read, as the charge is explained. For a brief moment his face is blank. Then something passes through it. Not surprise. Recognition. He does not resist. His hands go behind his back without protest. As he is led to the patrol car, the night seems to close around him, the same way it did decades earlier around the victim. Inside the interrogation room, the air is sterile and bright. The suspect sits alone at first, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. When detectives enter, they speak calmly. Biographical questions. Confirmation of details. He answers smoothly. Years of practice at being unremarkable. Then Texas comes up. 1984. Construction work. The broken taillight. The routine traffic stop. His answers slow. His eyes flicker. Detectives note the change. They let silence stretch. Silence is pressure. Silence forces memory to surface. They present evidence gradually. employment records, address histories, the traffic citation. He dismisses each one. Coincidence? Long time ago. Hard to remember. Then they slide the DNA report across the table. He stares at it longer than the others. The room shifts. His shoulders drop slightly. The man who entered confident now looks tired. He does not confess outright. Instead, he fragments the truth. He claims he met the victim. He claims there was an argument. He claims it went too far. He avoids the word murder, but the weight of it hangs in the air. Outside the station, the story breaks. Headlines ignite. Cold case cracked. Texas 1984 murder linked to traffic stop. The community reacts with disbelief. Older residents feel a strange relief mixed with renewed grief. Younger ones realize they have been living on top of an unresolved past. Detectives watch the coverage quietly. They know this moment belongs not to them, but to the victim and the family who waited decades for movement, for acknowledgement, for truth to finally surface. Yet even now, the case does not feel finished. Motive remains blurred. The exact sequence of events exists only in fragments. Cold cases do not give everything back. They give enough to remind us that time does not erase responsibility. The suspect sits in a holding cell, the noise of the world pressing in through concrete and steel. Somewhere deep in memory, the night of 1984 replays, no longer sealed away. The silence that protected it is gone. And for the first time in decades, the case is no longer frozen in time. Morning arrives without ceremony, but it lands differently now. In the courthouse parking lot, cars pull in one by one, tires crunching gravel that has heard too many stories like this. Inside, fluorescent lights hum above polished floors as if nothing extraordinary is about to happen. Yet the building carries a charge. A Texas 1984 cold case is no longer just a headline. It is a living thing again. Breathing through motions, filings, whispered conversations between attorneys who know the weight of what they are about to argue. The suspect is brought in through a side entrance. Shackles low, wrists cuffed, movements measured. He does not look like history. He looks like a man late for work, slightly hunched, eyes fixed ahead. That ordinariness unsettles everyone who notices it. Monsters are easier when they look the part. This one never did. In a small conference room nearby, prosecutors lay out photographs on a long table. Black and white crime scene images from 1984 sit beside glossy color printouts from modern forensic labs. Old meets new. Grainy shadows beside razor-sharp molecular certainty. The contrast feels almost obscene. Back then, investigators relied on instinct, shoe leather, interviews that led nowhere. Now the case speaks through science, through probabilities so tight they feel like absolutes. The victim's name is spoken often today, aloud, deliberately. For decades it existed mostly on paper, in faded reports, in a family's private grief. Now it echoes in official spaces again. Clerks repeat it. Lawyers repeat it. Each repetition restores a small piece of stolen presence. The arraignment is brief. Charges read. Rights explained. The suspect listens without expression. When asked to enter a plea, his voice is steady. Not guilty. The words fall flat, expected, procedural. But behind them something trembles. He knows the DNA does not forget. He knows the story is no longer his alone to control. Outside the courtroom, cameras wait. Reporters practice their lines, adjusting microphones, already shaping the narrative for the evening news. Routine traffic stop links suspect to decades-old murder. Cold case finally cracked. They talk about closure, justice, long overdue answers. Detectives passing by do not correct them, but they know better. Closure is a word used by people who have never lived inside an unsolved case. Inside the prosecutor's office, strategy takes form. The defense will attack the evidence from every angle. They will say the DNA was mishandled, that it degraded, that the technology did not exist in 1984 and therefore cannot be trusted now. They will imply that time itself makes truth unreliable. The prosecution prepares for all of it. They bring in experts. Forensic scientists explain patiently how samples were preserved, how controls were used, how the match exceeds astronomical odds. They rehearse testimony until it is clean, precise, unshakable. No drama, just facts. Cold cases are won not with emotion but with endurance. Meanwhile, detectives revisit old witnesses, some now elderly, some reluctant to reopen memories they sealed away long ago. Doors open slowly. Coffee is poured. Stories are told haltingly. One woman remembers seeing a vehicle pulled over near the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. She remembers thinking nothing of it. She remembers the time because her radio was playing the late-night news. She had never spoken to police before. She does now. Another man remembers the suspect from a bar near the construction site. A quiet drinker. Watched people. Left abruptly one night angry, muttering about someone who didn't know when to keep driving. These details alone would never solve a case. Together they begin to sound like context. The victim's family sits at home, television on but sound muted. They watch images of the courthouse scroll by. They recognize nothing of the process, only the ache beneath it. Every development brings hope sharpened by fear. What if it falls apart? What if, after all this, the past slips away again? The defense files motions. Suppress the DNA. Exclude prior statements. Question the legality of sample collection decades later. Each motion is a test, a probe for weakness. Prosecutors respond with documentation stacked inches thick. Evidence logs. Storage records. Chain of custody forms signed by hands long retired or deceased. The paper trail holds. Time tried to erase it. Failed. As pretrial hearings unfold, the suspect's demeanor changes subtly. He grows quieter, more withdrawn. In holding, he asks questions about sentencing ranges, about parole eligibility. Hypotheticals. Always hypotheticals. He never asks about the victim. The community feels the case tightening like a knot. Conversations start in diners, in church hallways, in break rooms. People who lived through the 1980s remember fear, rumors, the sense that something terrible had brushed past their town and never fully left. Younger residents listen, realizing the ground beneath them holds older stories than they imagined. One night, alone in the evidence room, a detective studies the original case file. Yellowed pages, coffee stains, handwritten notes and margins. There is frustration embedded in those lines, a sense of urgency that never found resolution. He feels a strange kinship with the investigators who came before him. They did not fail. They ran out of tools. The trial date is set. On the first day, the courtroom fills quickly. Family members sit together, hands clasped. Reporters line the back wall. Jurors file in, ordinary citizens about to be entrusted with extraordinary responsibility. The judge reminds them that this is not a story, not a documentary, not a headline. It is evidence. It is law. Opening statements begin. The prosecution speaks of a night in 1984, of a young life interrupted, of evidence that waited patiently for technology to catch up. They do not raise their voices. They do not need to. The facts do the work. The defense counters with doubt. They talk about memory decay, about the unreliability of witnesses recalling events from decades ago. They emphasize the absence of certain physical evidence. They suggest alternative scenarios without naming them. They plant questions like seeds. Witnesses take the stand. Forensic experts explain DNA with calm authority. They show charts, probabilities, sequences of letters that form a genetic fingerprint no one else could share. Jurors lean forward. This is not abstract. This is exact. Then the witnesses from the past speak. Voices tremble. Details surface imperfectly, humanly. The defense presses them. Time has blurred edges. But the core remains. A car. A road. A man. When detectives testify, they speak not of triumph but of process. Of how cold cases sleep, not die. Of how patience and persistence brought this one back. They describe the traffic stop, once routine, now pivotal. A moment no one noticed becoming the hinge of history. Throughout it all, the suspect watches. Sometimes he stares at the table. Sometimes he looks at the jury, searching for something. Sympathy. Doubt. Forgetting. He finds none. As days pass, the weight of the trial settles over the room like humidity. Everyone feels it. Even the judge seems older by the end of each session. This is the cost of time. It makes everything heavier. When closing arguments arrive, the prosecution speaks of silence. Of how decades allowed a man to walk free while a family waited. Of how science finally gave voice to what the victim could not say. They ask the jury to listen to that voice. The defense makes one last appeal to uncertainty. to the idea that no one can truly know what happened that night. They ask jurors to protect the accused from the imperfections of the past. The jury retreats. Hours pass. Then more. No one speaks loudly. The hallway hums with restrained anxiety. When the jury returns, everyone stands. Breath is held. The verdict is read. Guilty. The word lands with force but not surprise. The victim's family exhales in unison, some sobbing quietly, some staring straight ahead, faces wet and stunned. The suspect closes his eyes. For the first time, his composure fractures. The past has finally caught him. Sentencing will come later. Appeals will follow. Cold cases never truly end. But something fundamental has shifted. Outside, reporters rush to file their stories. Headlines flash across screens. Texas 1984 cold case cracked. Routine traffic stop leads to conviction. The community absorbs it slowly, unevenly. Justice has moved, but time cannot be undone. As night falls, the courthouse empties. Lights dim. The building returns to quiet. But somewhere in the spaces between memory and record, the case finally rests, no longer frozen, no longer forgotten, its echo still lingering in the dark, reminding everyone that silence can last decades, but it does not last forever. The sentence does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like gravity, steady and unavoidable. Years collapse into minutes as the judge reads from prepared pages, voice even, almost gentle, as if softness could cushion the weight of what is being said. Life imprisonment. No parole for decades. The words hang in the air, heavier than any shout. The suspect, now the convicted, does not react at first. His shoulders remain squared, his hands folded. Only when the bailiff steps closer does he seem to register that this is real, that time has finally chosen a direction and it is no longer his. Behind him, the victim's family absorbs the moment in fragments. A mother grips the edge of the bench so tightly her knuckles blanch. A brother stares forward, eyes glassy, jaw locked, as if emotion is something that might break loose if he allows it even an inch. There is no celebration. There is release, yes, but it is quiet, exhausted, incomplete. Justice does not restore what was taken. It only stops the taking from continuing. Outside the courtroom, microphones are thrust forward again. Prosecutors speak of perseverance, of science, of teamwork across generations. Detectives speak of relief, of responsibility fulfilled. No one claims victory. Cold cases do not feel like wins. They feel like debts finally acknowledged. The defense announces an appeal within hours. It is expected. DNA, they argue, is powerful but not infallible. Procedures will be scrutinized. Timelines re-examined. The legal machinery grinds on, indifferent to emotion. The family hears this and nods. They have waited this long. Waiting is something they know how to do. That night, the town does not sleep easily. Porch lights stay on. Conversations linger longer than usual. People replay memories they did not realize they still carried. The road where it happened looks unchanged, but now it feels different, charged. Drivers slow as they pass, unconsciously, as if the asphalt itself remembers. In a small house at the edge of town, the victim's mother sits alone at the kitchen table. Old photographs are spread before her. School portraits. A candid shot taken weeks before the murder, sunlight caught mid-laugh. She touches the edges carefully like fragile evidence. For years these photos felt like accusations. Tonight they feel like witnesses. She thinks about the trial, about hearing details she never wanted but always needed. About the traffic stop, the chance encounter. The violence compressed into minutes that reshape decades. She wonders how many ordinary nights hide the potential to become something monstrous. The thought does not frighten her anymore. Simply feels true. In prison intake, the convicted man is processed with bureaucratic efficiency. Clothes exchanged. Property inventoried. Identity reduced to a number. As the cell door closes for the first time, he finally speaks, asking a guard how long appeals usually take. The guard shrugs. Depends, he says. Time once again refuses to give specifics. The appeal moves forward months later, slow and technical. Briefs are filed. Experts consulted. The same evidence is dissected again. Not for truth this time, but for flaw. Could contamination have occurred? Were storage conditions ideal? Did evolving standards compromise earlier preservation? Each question is sharp, deliberate. Each answer withstands scrutiny. At the appellate hearing, the courtroom is smaller, quieter. No cameras. No crowd. Just judges, lawyers, and the echo of arguments refined to their most surgical form. When the ruling comes, it is concise. Conviction upheld. Sentence affirmed. The past holds. News of the appeal's failure reaches the family on a Tuesday afternoon. No one cries this time. There is a nod, a shared breath, a sense of finality that feels unfamiliar. Not peace, but a boundary. Something has ended. Years pass. The case becomes a reference point. Detectives cite it in training sessions. This is why you preserve everything, they say, tapping the screen where grainy photos transition into high-resolution lab images. You don't know what the future can do with what you saved today. Young officers listen wide-eyed, imagining themselves decades from now, reopening folders they have not even created yet. The victim's name appears in articles, podcasts, documentaries. Each retelling sharpens certain details, dulls others. The family learns to live with that too. They correct errors when they can. They let some things go. Ownership of the story was lost long ago. What remains is stewardship. On anniversaries, flowers appear near the roadside. Sometimes anonymously. Sometimes with notes from strangers who never knew the victim but feel connected now. Through narrative, through shared vulnerability. Cold cases create communities no one asked for. The town changes slowly. New businesses open. Old ones close. Children grow up unaware that their playground once stood near a place of fear. And yet, the story lingers beneath the surface, woven into local identity. A reminder that quiet places are not immune. They are simply quieter about their scars. One evening, a retired detective visits the site alone. He stands by the shoulder, listening to the wind move through grass, to cars passing without slowing. He remembers the early days, the frustration, the sense of chasing shadows. He remembers thinking more than once that the case would never be solved. He feels no shame in that now. He did not know what the future would bring. None of them did. He leaves a small stone by the road, a personal ritual, then walks away. In prison, the man grows older. Appeals exhausted, routines established. He rarely speaks of the case. When he does, it is to deny, to reframe, to minimize. Memory is a malleable thing, especially when it is the only place left to exert control. Guards hear fragments, contradictions, half-confessions that evaporate when pressed. Nothing new emerges. The truth, such as it is, has already spoken. For the family, life continues in altered form. Milestones arrive with absence folded into them. Weddings, births, holidays. The solved case does not erase the ache, but it changes its shape. The unanswered question is gone. In its place is a harder truth, one that can be carried because it no longer shifts. Sometimes, late at night, the mother imagines the moment of the traffic stop again. The flashing lights. The engine idling. She imagines an alternate version where the car keeps moving, where nothing happens, where her child comes home. She allows herself the thought, then lets it pass. Imagination is no longer a refuge. Reality, however painful, is firmer ground. The case file is officially closed. A stamp marks the final page. But copies exist everywhere now: digital backups, archived exhibits, public records. Cold cases never truly disappear. They just change temperature. Years later, a student researching forensic breakthroughs stumbles across the case. He reads about the routine traffic stop, the preserved evidence, the delayed justice. He writes a paper arguing that patience is an investigative tool, as vital as any technology. His professor agrees. The ripple continues. What began as violence on a dark road becomes instruction, caution, memory. The solved cold case does not fade into obscurity. It settles into history, a fixed point reminding those who look closely that time can hide truth, but it cannot destroy it. And somewhere, beneath headlines and transcripts and scientific jargon, there remains a quieter narrative, the sound of a life interrupted, the echo of a community forced to remember, and the enduring fact that even the coldest cases are not beyond the reach of consequence. Time does not rush forward after a conviction. It stretches, thins, and settles into corners people forget to check. The headlines fade first. Then the interviews stop. The courthouse returns to its ordinary rhythm. Cases stacked on cases. Names spoken once and never again. But the cold case, now technically solved, refuses to fully leave. It lingers in quieter spaces, in pauses between conversations, in the way certain dates still trigger a tightening of the chest. Years after the verdict, the evidence room remains unchanged. Shelves hum softly under fluorescent lights. Boxes sit in regimented rows, each tagged, each silent. The box from 1984 still occupies its place, now stamped with closure codes, appeal numbers, final disposition. Inside, the items are inert. Fabric, metal, paper. But their presence still feels charged, as if memory itself has mass. A young evidence technician pauses one afternoon, glancing at the label longer than required. She has heard the story. Everyone here has. She wonders how many other boxes hold futures that have not yet arrived. The town's relationship with the case evolves into something more abstract. It becomes shorthand, a reference. When locals speak about advances in DNA or the importance of persistence, they mention it without details, assuming understanding. Outsiders nod politely, not realizing the weight carried in those few words. The old cold case, they say, as if age alone explains the damage. For the victim's family, distance from the trial does not mean distance from consequence. Therapy sessions continue. Some days are light, almost normal. Others are heavy with memories that surface uninvited. Grief, they learn, is not linear. It loops, doubles back. It surprises you in grocery store aisles and at stoplights. The difference now is that it no longer carries confusion. The question of who did this is answered. The question of why never will be. A journalist, years later, requests an interview for a retrospective piece on cold cases solved by chance encounters. The family debates. They have said everything already, but they agree cautiously. During the interview, the reporter asks about closure. The word hangs awkwardly. The mother corrects him gently. There's no closure, she says. There's just less noise. He writes that down, unsure if it will make sense to readers. It will. The convicted man files one final motion from prison, handwritten, poorly structured, more plea than argument. It is denied without hearing. The system has finished with him. In the margins of the denial, a clerk notes the case number automatically, without recognition. To her, it is just another file. That anonymity is its own kind of ending. In the years that follow, similar cases surface across the country. Old crimes revived by new science. Names pulled from obscurity. Each time, the family watches the news with a mix of empathy and exhaustion. They recognize the expressions on other families' faces. The tentative hope. The fear of disappointment. They want to reach through the screen and warn them that answers do not heal the way people promise. They stay silent instead. A former patrol officer, now retired, occasionally thinks about the traffic stop. He has replayed it countless times. The decision to run the plate again. The pause before stepping out of the cruiser. He knows intellectually that it was routine, that chance governs far more than intention. Still, the thought persists. What if he had waved the car through? What if he had been called elsewhere? The line between solved and unsolved feels terrifyingly thin. He speaks about it once at a retirement dinner, voice unsteady after a drink too many. The room quiets. Younger officers listen, sensing the gravity beneath the story. You don't know which stop matters, he tells them. So you treat them all like they do. It becomes advice passed down, unofficial but sincere. The physical landscape continues to erase traces of the past. The roadside is repaved. A new sign goes up. Wildflowers grow where evidence markers once stood. To someone passing through, it is unremarkable. To those who know, it is layered ground thick with invisible history. Memory, unlike asphalt, does not smooth easily. One autumn, the victim's sibling returns to town after years away. He drives the roads he avoided for decades, surprised by how small everything feels now. He parks near the site, sits in his car, engine off. He does not get out. He does not need to. The place has shifted inside him. Fear has been replaced by something harder to define, recognition perhaps, or acceptance stripped of comfort. He thinks about the trial testimony, about hearing the details spoken aloud, official, undeniable. He remembers the moment the DNA expert pointed to charts and explained probabilities so small they felt theoretical. 1 in billions. He remembers thinking that numbers like that should not exist in the same universe as grief. And yet they did. The solved cold case enters academic circles. Law review articles analyze it. Conferences reference it. Panels discuss the ethics of delayed justice, the psychological toll of reopened wounds. The case becomes an example, a teaching tool. Its human core is often summarized in a paragraph. Its complexity reduced for clarity. This is necessary. It is also imperfect. The family reads one such article sent by a friend. They skim it, noting inaccuracies, simplifications. They do not correct them. Precision mattered in court. In history, approximation is often all that remains. In prison, routines calcify. Days blur. The convicted man ages quietly, his name occasionally appearing in databases accessed by researchers or journalists. He grants one interview, then regrets it when the piece paints him as he believes he is not. He retreats into silence again. Silence has always been his most consistent companion. The detective who reopened the case retires years later, his career defined in part by this one success. At his farewell, colleagues praise his dedication. He thanks them, then deflects. He knows how many cold cases remain unsolved, how many boxes still sit untouched. He does not believe in happy endings. He believes in effort. On his last day, he walks through the records room one final time. He stops at the shelf where the box once sat, now relocated to closed archives. He feels an unexpected ache. Solving the case did not end his relationship with it. It simply changed its terms. The town holds a small memorial on the anniversary of the verdict rather than the crime. It is informal. No speeches. Just candles, quiet conversation. Someone brings coffee. Someone else brings flowers. They stand together, not to relive the violence, but to acknowledge endurance. The cold case is no longer an open wound, but it is still a scar, visible when the light hits it just right. As night falls, the candles flicker out one by one. People drift home. The road hums with passing traffic, indifferent, continuous. Somewhere, another routine stop is happening. Somewhere, evidence is being logged, preserved, forgotten. Somewhere, a future answer is waiting for the right moment to arrive. The solved cold case does not announce itself anymore. It whispers, reminding those who listen that time is not an enemy or an ally. It is a medium. And within it, truth can survive longer than anyone expects, patient, silent, and eventually undeniable. Silence after justice is different from silence before it. Before it is sharp, unanswered, filled with noise no one else can hear. After it becomes heavier, slower, like air before a storm that never fully breaks. The town learns this distinction without ever naming it. Life resumes, but it does not reset. It layers. Years drift by. Children who were not yet born in 1984 grow up hearing fragments of the story the way other kids hear local legends. Not ghosts or monsters, but something closer, something real. A murder that slept for decades. A traffic stop that woke it up. Teachers avoid the topic. Parents do not. They speak about it in lowered voices, as a warning and a lesson tangled together. Be careful. Pay attention. The past is closer than it looks. The house where the victim once lived changes owners twice. Fresh paint covers old walls. New furniture replaces what was hauled out by police all those years ago. Still, there are moments when the place feels unsettled. A creak in the hallway at night. A draft that carries no scent but memory. The current residents know the history. Everyone does. They tell themselves walls do not remember. They are not entirely convinced. The victim's name appears occasionally in unexpected places. A scholarship fund established quietly by a relative awards its first recipient. The ceremony is small, respectful. No cameras. The student thanks the family, unaware of the full gravity behind the name on the plaque. That is intentional. The family wants the name associated with futures, not endings. Meanwhile, the legal system continues to dissect the case in its own sterile language. Appeals fail. Procedural reviews conclude. The file grows thicker even after it is closed, paperwork stacking like sediment. Each document affirms the same thing. The verdict stands. The law satisfied moves on. But memory does not operate on schedules. An old witness, now elderly, wakes one night convinced she hears the knock again. She sits up in bed, heart racing, before realizing she is decades removed from that moment. The knock exists only in her body now, stored somewhere deeper than thought. She does not tell anyone. Some experiences lose clarity when spoken aloud. The detective receives an email from a student researching cold cases solved by chance. The questions are earnest, technical. He answers them carefully, choosing words that neither romanticize nor diminish the work. He resists the urge to explain the emotional residue. That part he knows cannot be taught. It is absorbed only through proximity. In another state, a family dealing with their own unsolved murder reaches out after reading about the case. They ask for advice. How do you endure decades without answers? The response is honest but limited. You don't endure, not really. You adapt. You build a life around an absence and learn not to fall into it every day. The family writes back to say thank you. It is unclear what they are thanking him for. The convicted man's presence fades further into abstraction. His name becomes a line in statistics, a data point cited in reports about cold case resolution rates. He is discussed without context, without face. This anonymity is both punishment and mercy. In prison, days continue in regulated monotony. He marks time differently now, not by calendars but by physical decline. The world outside shrinks to rumors and filtered news. The case that once defined him becomes something others own. One winter, a local museum hosts an exhibit on forensic science. Glass cases display tools, timelines, diagrams explaining DNA, fingerprints, fiber analysis. A panel references the 1984 murder, careful, factual. Visitors pause longer at that section. They whisper. Some recognize the names. Some do not. The exhibit ends with a quote about persistence. It is attributed to no one. A child asks their parent why it took so long to solve. The parent hesitates, then answers truthfully. Because people miss things. Because technology wasn't ready. Because sometimes the truth waits for permission to be seen. The child nods, satisfied for now. Anniversaries remain complicated. The date of the crime still carries weight, but the date of the arrest does too. Two markers on the calendar, each pulling in opposite emotional directions. The family chooses eventually to honor the latter. They gather quietly, share a meal, talk about unrelated things. Laughter feels like rebellion. It also feels earned. At night, the roads outside town stretch empty, illuminated by passing headlights. The same kind of headlights that once cut through darkness on a routine patrol. That image never fully loses its power. It is replayed in training videos, in lectures, in private thoughts. The idea that ordinary moments can contain extraordinary consequence settles into the collective consciousness. A former juror writes in a journal years later, reflecting on the trial. She remembers the weight of responsibility, the careful deliberations, the silence when the verdict was read. She wonders if she would decide the same way again. She believes she would. Doubt, she has learned, is not the same as regret. The solved cold case begins to blur at the edges, its details softened by time. This is not neglect. It is survival. Communities cannot hold constant intensity forever. They metabolize trauma the way bodies process toxins, slowly, imperfectly, leaving traces behind. And yet, certain triggers still pull it back into sharp focus. A news alert about another decades-old case cracked open. A podcast episode that echoes familiar beats. A line of dialogue in a movie that hits too close. Each time there is a collective intake of breath followed by release. Yes, that happened here too. We lived through that. The victim's mother, older now, walks past the roadside memorial one afternoon. It has been refreshed by someone anonymous. New flowers. A clean stone. She stops, touches it lightly. There is no anger left in the gesture. Just acknowledgement. She does not stay long. Lingering no longer serves her. In classrooms and courtrooms, the phrase cold case continues to carry weight. It implies failure, patience, hope. It suggests something unfinished. This one officially is finished. But the phrase still clings to it because temperature is not just about status. It is about feeling. In some cases, no matter how resolved, never fully warm. Late one evening, the retired detective sits on his porch, listening to crickets. He thinks about the first day he reopened the file, the smell of old paper, the dust. He remembers thinking the odds were slim. He remembers being wrong. That memory does not make him optimistic about all the others. It makes him stubborn. The town sleeps. Lights flicker off one by one. The solved cold case rests somewhere between history and memory, no longer demanding attention, but never entirely silent. It has become part of the landscape, like a river that once flooded and now flows quietly, its banks reshaped forever by what passed through. And in that quiet something remains. Not fear, not resolution, but awareness. A shared understanding that time does not erase truth, only hides it. And that sometimes when no one expects it, the past reaches forward, taps the present on the shoulder, and asks to be seen one last time. Time does not close a case the way a judge's gavel does. It seeps into it, stains it, leaves outlines where sharp edges used to be. In the years after the conviction, the town discovers this slowly, through moments that arrive uninvited. A siren in the distance. A patrol car idling too long at an intersection. The soft clink of handcuffs on a police drama playing in the background while dinner is cooking. None of it announces itself as memory, but all of it is. The courthouse empties of spectators and returns to its quieter rhythm. Floors are waxed. Offices reorganized. New faces replace old ones behind desks. The case file, once passed hand to hand, now lives in a climate-controlled room, boxed, labeled, indexed. It is safe there, preserved, and strangely distant. Anyone can request access, but few do. The need has diminished, replaced by something closer to acceptance. Local law enforcement incorporates the story into training, but carefully. Not as legend, not as triumph, as caution, as reminder. The slide presentation is sparse. Dates, evidence, the traffic stop, the fingerprint, the chain that finally connected. Recruits listen intently. Some imagine themselves in that moment, the ordinary stop that became extraordinary. Others wonder how many such moments they will miss without ever knowing. A new detective, young and precise, studies the old reports late one night. She traces the handwritten notes, the crossed-out assumptions, the questions left unanswered for decades. She feels respect but also frustration. She knows the tools she has now, the databases, the algorithms. She also knows they mean nothing without patience. Technology did not solve the case alone. Someone had to look again. The victim's extended family begins to shift its rituals. Birthdays become less complicated. Stories about the victim move from hushed reverence to gentle inclusion. A favorite song is played at a wedding. A shared joke is repeated without the pause that used to follow, the one that made everyone aware of who was missing. This too is progress. Still, there are days when the old weight returns, when grief feels renewed rather than resolved. The family has learned not to fear those days. They let them come. They let them pass. Grief, they understand now, is not a problem to be fixed but a companion that changes shape over time. A journalist revisits the town, years after the headlines faded. He expects resistance. He finds none. People talk openly but without urgency. They have told the story enough times that it no longer drains them. He notices how often they emphasize the waiting rather than the crime itself. The decades between. The long quiet. The feeling that something unfinished hovered over everyday life. He interviews a former officer who was on the force in 1984, now retired and slower in his movements. The man admits he thought the case would never be solved. He remembers telling himself that justice sometimes simply runs out of time. Saying it aloud now, after being proven wrong, feels strange. Humbling. He laughs softly at his own certainty. Elsewhere, an archivist digitizes old evidence logs. She scans photographs taken with outdated cameras, images grainy but precise. She handles them with gloves, aware that these objects once sat on shelves unnoticed. The scanner hums. The images become data. The past adapts again, finding new forms. The convicted man's appeals have ceased. His name surfaces rarely now, usually buried in reports about prison populations or aging inmates. He has become what the system prefers: static, predictable, no longer disruptive. Inside, he exists in routine. Outside, he exists in memory, but only as a shadow at the edge of the story. The focus has shifted where it belongs. One autumn, a memorial run is organized quietly without press. Participants wear plain shirts with a single line printed across the front. Remembering is an action. They run through familiar streets, past places that once felt heavier. Neighbors come out to watch. Some join spontaneously, falling into step without knowing exactly why. The run ends without speeches. People disperse, breathing hard, connected. A high school class studies criminal justice and selects the case for a project. The students approach it analytically, constructing timelines, identifying decision points. Their teacher watches them work and realizes something important. For them, this is history, not lived experience. The realization brings relief and sadness in equal measure. At night, the town remains quiet. The same quiet it has always known. But now the quiet is not charged with unanswered questions. It is simply space. The difference is subtle but profound. People sleep more easily without knowing exactly why. The detective receives one last letter from the victim's family. It is not a thank you note in the traditional sense. It is a reflection. They write about what closure means to them now. Not an ending. Not peace. Just the absence of constant tension. The detective reads it twice, then files it away separately from the case documents. Some things do not belong in evidence boxes. A neighboring county reopens its own cold case after seeing what persistence can yield. The investigators there temper their expectations. They know this story is the exception, not the rule. Still, exceptions matter. They prove possibility. They justify effort. Years later, the road where the traffic stop occurred is repaved. The asphalt is smooth, unmarked. No sign indicates what happened there, and none is needed. The event has migrated from location to narrative. It lives in words now, not coordinates. A former juror attends a lecture on memory and decision-making. She listens as the speaker explains how confidence is constructed, how certainty can coexist with doubt. She recognizes herself in the description. She does not feel defensive. She feels understood. The victim's mother, now frail but sharp-eyed, sits by a window watching snowfall. She thinks about how long she waited for an answer, how that waiting shaped her. She does not romanticize it. She does not wish it on anyone. But she acknowledges its role. It taught her endurance she did not know she possessed. The solved cold case becomes a reference point rather than a wound. A reminder that truth can survive neglect. That evidence can outlast assumptions. That time, while not kind, is not always cruel. Sometimes it simply waits. And yet, the story never fully settles. It resists being archived completely. Each retelling shifts emphasis slightly, reflecting the needs of the teller. For some, it is about justice delayed. For others, about chance. For others still, about the quiet heroism of attention. Late one night, a patrol officer pulls over a car for a minor infraction. The exchange is routine. Documents checked. Warnings given. The car drives off into darkness. The officer returns to the cruiser, heart rate steady, unaware that history has just echoed, faint and harmless. Not every moment carries consequence. But every moment carries potential. The town continues, layered with its past but not trapped by it. The cold case, once a symbol of failure, now stands as something more complicated. A lesson. A scar. A story told in measured tones. It does not dominate the present, but it informs it, quietly, persistently. And in that persistence there is something almost like hope. Not the loud celebratory kind. The quieter kind. The kind that waits, watches, and believes that even after decades of silence, something true can still be heard. Long after the headlines have thinned to footnotes, the cold case continues to move through the town like an underground current, invisible but shaping the ground above it. It shows itself in conversations that start somewhere else and drift, almost inevitably, back to that year. In the way people mark time as before and after without needing to specify what came between. In the instinctive pause whenever someone mentions an unsolved crime, even now, even after this one no longer qualifies. The police department undergoes quiet changes. New leadership arrives with modern language and fresh priorities. But the solved case lingers in briefing rooms as an unspoken benchmark. It altered the culture more than any policy memo ever could. Officers talk less about clearance rates and more about follow-through. About patience. About the danger of assuming that silence means absence. A veteran detective, nearing retirement, cleans out his desk and finds an old notebook. Inside are scribbles from dozens of cases, some resolved, some not. One page stops him cold. A single line written decades earlier reads, "No prints match." Leads exhausted. He remembers the frustration of that moment, the sense of finality it carried. He flips the page slowly, aware now of how temporary such declarations really are. Across town, the victim's childhood home is sold. The new owners repaint the exterior, plant new shrubs, replace the mailbox. The house looks lighter, less burdened. Neighbors watch the transformation with mixed feelings. Progress is welcome, but it also feels like erasure. In truth, it is neither. The story does not live in the siding or the soil. It lives in people. A local library hosts a small panel discussion on cold cases and forensic advances. Attendance is modest but attentive. One speaker emphasizes that breakthroughs rarely come from dramatic revelations. They come from routine, from reviewing evidence with fresh eyes, from refusing to let familiarity dull curiosity. The audience nods, recognizing the theme. They have lived it. The journalist publishes his long-form piece. It avoids sensational language, focusing instead on the slow burn of uncertainty and the sudden rupture of resolution. Readers respond not with outrage, but with reflection. Letters arrive describing similar waits, similar silences. The article becomes a mirror more than a spotlight. In the prison system, the convicted man ages visibly. His world shrinks to schedules and counts, to the small rituals that define institutional life. He gives few interviews, and those he gives are careful, rehearsed. There is no grand confession, no cinematic reckoning. Reality, as usual, is quieter, more contained. A forensic technician attends a conference and presents a case study without naming it. She speaks about evidence longevity, about how proper storage allowed a fingerprint to survive decades intact. Her colleagues listen, intrigued. Some take notes. Others think of boxes in their own evidence rooms waiting. The town's younger generation grows up with the story already resolved. For them, it is not a haunting mystery but a cautionary tale. They learn that justice can be delayed, that systems can fail and recover, that truth is sometimes buried under routine. They accept these lessons without the emotional weight their parents carried. This too is a form of healing. One evening, a community meeting is held about public safety. The solved cold case is mentioned only briefly, as an example of perseverance. The discussion quickly moves on to lighting, patrol schedules, neighborhood watches. Life insists on practicality. The past is acknowledged, then set gently aside. The victim's sibling, now older than the victim ever was, reflects on that fact often. Age has a way of making absence more tangible. They carry memories forward, aware that they are now the primary custodian of a life interrupted. It is a responsibility they did not choose but have accepted. A filmmaker considers adapting the story but ultimately decides against it. The narrative, he feels, resists dramatization. Its power lies in restraint, in the spaces between events, in the long stretches where nothing happened, and the cost of that nothingness. The police department marks the anniversary of the case's resolution internally. No press release, just a quiet acknowledgement among those who worked it. They understand that celebration feels inappropriate. What they feel instead is resolve, a renewed commitment to cases still waiting. A cold case unit receives funding as a direct result of the attention. It is not large, but it is steady. Investigators begin reopening files with realistic expectations. They know most will remain unsolved, but they also know that one might not. And that is enough. The town's relationship with time changes subtly. People become more patient with delays, more skeptical of final answers. They have learned that time can be both obstacle and ally. That waiting does not always mean losing. Late at night, a former juror dreams of the courtroom. In the dream, the verdict is still pending, the room suspended in anticipation. She wakes with her heart racing, then calms herself with the knowledge of how it ended. Dreams lag behind reality sometimes. They catch up eventually. A small plaque is installed in a community garden, not naming the crime but honoring resilience. Passers-by read it without context, interpreting it in their own ways. That too feels right. The story belongs to those who lived it, but its lessons are universal. The solved cold case becomes a reference in academic papers about investigative persistence. It is cited, analyzed, abstracted. Stripped of emotion, it becomes data. This transformation feels strange to those who remember the fear and grief. But they understand. Stories evolve. A neighbor who once suspected everyone now trusts more easily. The resolution lifted a weight he did not realize he carried. Suspicion, he learns, is exhausting. Certainty, even painful certainty, is less so. The victim's favorite place, a small clearing by a river, remains unchanged. The water moves as it always has, indifferent to human timelines. Family members visit occasionally, not to mourn but to remember. The difference matters. As years pass, the case recedes further into history. It does not vanish, but it no longer defines the town. It becomes one thread among many, woven into a larger tapestry of shared experience. And yet, whenever someone mentions a cold case on the news, heads still turn. Attention sharpens. Because this town knows something others might forget. That silence is not proof. That routine can hide revelation. That the past is patient. The story at its core is not about a single crime or a single arrest. It is about endurance. About the human capacity to keep asking questions long after the world has moved on. About the quiet courage of revisiting what everyone else has abandoned. In the end, the solved cold case leaves behind not closure but clarity. A sense that truth, however delayed, carries weight. That it changes people, reshapes communities, and leaves marks that time cannot erase. The town moves forward, aware of its history but not bound by it. The case rests now, not because it was forgotten but because it was finally heard. Years later, the phrase cold case still carries an echo through Texas towns like this one. Not as a headline anymore, but as a warning label attached to memory. It no longer screams from newspapers or flashes across television screens. Yet it lingers in the background noise of daily life, subtle and persistent, like static you only notice when the room goes quiet. People here learn something fundamental from the case that finally broke open. Time does not erase truth, it only buries it deeper, waiting for the wrong moment to surface or the right one to be forced. Inside the police archives, the file has been officially closed, stamped, and catalogued, its thick spine resting among hundreds of others. But closure, in practice, is a polite fiction. Detectives still pull it from the shelf when training new investigators, not to celebrate success, but to underline failure, delay, and consequence. They point out the early assumptions, the overlooked inconsistencies, the witness statements that were taken at face value because the shift was ending or the night was long. The lesson is not flattering. That is precisely why it endures. A new generation of officers listens with a mix of confidence and unease. Technology has improved, they tell themselves. Databases are faster. DNA is sharper. Mistakes like that won't happen again. The veterans do not argue. They simply nod, having once believed the same thing. Progress does not eliminate blind spots. It only rearranges them. The traffic stop that cracked the case becomes legend within law enforcement circles, retold in briefings and conferences as proof that routine is never truly routine. A broken taillight. A nervous glance. A name that did not belong where it was. None of it dramatic in isolation. Together, it shifted the weight of decades. The unsettling truth is how easily it could have gone unnoticed. How close the case came to remaining buried forever under the mundane machinery of everyday policing. The officer who made the stop never sought attention. He gave statements, answered questions, then returned to patrol. Recognition makes him uncomfortable. He knows better than anyone that his role was accidental. Another car, another shift, another decision, and the moment would have passed. He carries that knowledge quietly, a reminder that justice sometimes hinges on chance more than design. In the town, memory settles into specific places. The stretch of road where the victim was last seen. The bar that closed years ago but still gets mentioned in stories. The courthouse steps where reporters once stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones raised, waiting for confirmation that the impossible had finally happened. These locations hold no markers, no plaques. They don't need them. The people remember. The victim's name still surfaces in conversations, though less frequently now. Not whispered, not spoken with fear, but with a careful respect. Their life has become shorthand for loss deferred, for questions that outlived the people who first asked them. Friends who once waited for answers are gone now, buried with their uncertainty. That fact weighs heavily on those still here. Justice arrived, but not in time for everyone. The family continues to navigate an awkward landscape of resolution without relief. They are grateful for answers, but gratitude feels thin compared to what was taken. Court documents do not restore birthdays or shared holidays. Verdicts do not rewrite history. What they do offer is permission to stop imagining every possible ending. The truth, however painful, is finite. That matters. At community gatherings, someone inevitably asks whether the case truly feels finished. The answer is always complicated. Legally, yes. Emotionally, no. Socially, maybe. The town has learned that resolution is not a switch but a dimmer, adjusted slowly over years, sometimes brightening, sometimes darkening again without warning. The convicted man files appeals that go nowhere. Each denial is a procedural footnote, noticed by lawyers, ignored by most others. His presence fades from public consciousness, replaced by newer crimes, fresher tragedies. This is how the system moves forward, indifferent to individual narratives. He becomes another inmate, another number, another cautionary example studied in criminology courses. Meanwhile, the ripple effects continue quietly. Funding for evidence preservation increases statewide. Departments audit their storage practices, embarrassed by how much once depended on cardboard boxes and handwritten labels. Technology did not solve the case alone, but it exposed how fragile the past can be when neglected. A former investigator admits, in a rare moment of candor, that the case haunted him more after it was solved than before. When it was unsolved, there was at least uncertainty to hide behind. Once the truth emerged, it forced him to revisit every decision he made, every lead he dismissed. Closure, he learned, can be more uncomfortable than mystery. The town's younger residents, born long after the crime, learn about it in fragments. A teacher mentions it during a lesson on forensic science. A parent references it during a discussion about safety. They absorb it as history, distant and abstract, unaware of how deeply it once shaped the people around them. This distance is natural. It is also necessary. Communities cannot survive if they remain permanently anchored to their worst moments. Yet the cold case leaves behind a permanent alteration in tone. When a new crime occurs, even a minor one, the response is sharper, more coordinated. Complacency has been replaced with vigilance. The town does not assume things will resolve themselves anymore. They know better. Late one evening, the journalist revisits his notes. He considers writing a follow-up, something reflective, something about life after resolution. He ultimately decides against it. The story, he realizes, no longer belongs to the media. It belongs to those who lived through the waiting, the doubt, the years of unanswered questions. Sometimes the most respectful thing to do is stop talking. In the evidence room, the physical artifacts of the case remain sealed, preserved for legal necessity rather than investigative hope. They sit under fluorescent lights, inert and silent. Objects that once carried terror now function as proof, stripped of emotion. This transformation feels unsettling, but it is also essential. Justice requires distance even when memory does not. A retired judge reflects on the trial during an interview years later. He speaks carefully, aware of the weight his words carry. He describes the moment he realized the jury understood. That subtle shift in posture, the quiet intensity. He says it reminded him that truth has a gravity of its own. Once revealed, it pulls everything toward it, whether people are ready or not. The phrase cold case crack still circulates online, paired with thumbnail images and dramatic captions. The internet flattens nuance, compresses decades into minutes. Those who know the story intimately rarely engage. They understand what gets lost in translation. The waiting, the fear, the silence. The town itself continues changing. New businesses open, old ones close. Streets are repaved. Trisgrou taller. Life insists on motion. But beneath the visible progress lies a shared understanding that time alone does not heal. Attention does. Persistence does. Refusal to forget does. When asked what the case ultimately taught them, many residents struggle to answer. Some say it restored faith in justice. Others say it destroyed illusions. Both can be true. The cold case did not deliver a clean moral lesson. It delivered complexity. It showed that systems are human, that humans are flawed, and that persistence is often the only counterbalance. On quiet nights, when the town settles and the highways hum in the distance, the story feels closer. Not threatening, not painful, just present. A reminder etched into the collective consciousness. The case is no longer active, but its impact is ongoing, shaping decisions, attitudes, and expectations. In that sense, the cold case never truly ends. It transforms. From mystery to lesson. From fear to vigilance. From unanswered question to permanent reminder that truth, no matter how delayed, leaves a mark when it finally arrives. And as the town moves forward, carrying both the weight and the wisdom of what happened, one thing remains certain. Somewhere in another place, another file sits unopened, another truth waits patiently, and another ordinary moment is poised to become extraordinary.